everybody, and thank you for joining me again today. I'm going to be diving into Isekai. Escapism or power of friendship? So this has been, there's a lot of Isekai that's been coming out lately, and it's interesting to see all the different ways in which this medium can be tackled, but it's kind of becoming its own genre at the same time. And then there's some ancillary to Isekai where it's fantasy but with video game rules, and I'm not completely sure where that sits in the cosmic sphere of Isekai. But I mean, generally, shows like Overlord, Tsukuichi, Sword Art Online, I think was one of the first. Well, I don't know if that one counts. Shield Hero, Ari Ferretta, Commonplace the World's Strongest. The list goes on and on. And there's definitely, recurring themes. The character has some sort of undervalued skill that ends up being extremely useful and then reaches cartoonishly powerful proportions by, the end of season 1. Overlord being an exception to that. Overlord, he's maxed out from the get-go. He's just trapped in a video game world that is surprisingly real and has a lot of rules that he had not anticipated. And I feel like there's a lot going on here. I was speaking with another author recently, and one of the ideas I had about this, I compared it to earlier fiction. So there was the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon back in the 80s. There's C.S. Lewis' Chronicles of Narnia. There's Alice in Wonderland. There's a lot of different stories that have this motif of a young person wandering off to some magical other world and then eventually having to come back. But that second part is the crux of the story. They go away to this other magical world. They learn the lesson that they need to come back as a fully actualized person to participate in society. And Isekai kind of throws that out the window and is like, nah, I'm okay. I'm good on society. I'm just going to live in video game land now. And I think, were that an option, I think there's a lot of people that would definitely jump on that. I think that there is a lot of the pastoral element of getting to slow down life. I mean, obviously, these stories are a lot of action, a lot of adventure, a lot of leveling up and going on quests. But there's also the idea of, owning a farm, living in a village, being away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, as we are surrounded by, ever-increasing urban populations, mass media bombardment from every direction, even on our phones and in our home screens when we turn on our computers, traffic, higher costs of living, increased job competition. It's a lot to keep up with, and I can definitely see the allure of going someplace else, of just getting away from it all, and maybe never coming back. I think that never coming back element is the part that is most recent. I have definitely not seen that in previous, up till about 10, 15 years ago. I would say about 10 years ago when the Isekai genre really started going, and I didn't reel out of the manga, so I don't know how far back that might go, but as far as it being turned into anime, it's become very prevalent. I definitely think there is a lot to play with in that genre. I mean, obviously, all of the different shows have their own unique perspective. There can be some similarities between characters, but there seems to still be new ways of telling that story. Jack of all trades, party of none, water priest. There's several new ones that have just come out in the last year or two. So there's something nice because a bit of what to expect when you watch an Isekai. There's a certain repeatability that's still enjoyable. It's the same genre, even though it's a niche genre, but you kind of know what you're going to get when you go in, and it can still be enjoyable. And I suppose that's true of any genre, and that's why we go back to the same thing over and over again. But before I start rambling, or maybe I already have, there is also an element of found family. And I think that that is very important in storytelling, but also in how we maybe view escapism. So in the story, found family connecting with a group of misfits, and that's usually it. There's usually like a second princess that isn't going to inherit. There's some other adventurer that was kind of cartoonish and not completely good at what they did, but still had a lot of skill and in use to the party. An orphan usually involved. So you have these people that don't have a place to belong, and you have this person, a stranger in a strange land that has landed in Isekai world, and they gravitate towards each other. They become part of each other's orbit and learn from each other. They grow together. They grow to accept both each other and themselves. And there's some beautiful arcs in that aren't... I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of action going on, there's a lot of adventure, but the interpersonal discovery, I mean, that's what we're really there for. Story is not just about plot, and you'll hear me talk about this in other places. You may have heard other writer workshoppers, panelists that talk about this concept, but the plot is the sequence of events. The genre is the vehicle, but the story is the change. What shifts? What changes? How does the character grow? And watching this group of misfits grow together, become this pod that sticks together through thick and thin, it's wonderful. And as we get older, it's true that it does become harder to find. In high school, grade school, we've got our little group that we find. In college, we've got our clique that we get together with. And then we get out into the job market. And we might end up working a job where we have very little in common with most of our cohorts. We might find ourselves in an industry where it's paying the bills, but it's not filling our soul. And I would say the vast majority of us do that. Now, if you are not one of those people, that's great. Good for you. If you've got any advice for everybody else, feel free to leave that in the comments. But this idea of being able to find this group of friends as an adult, I mean, a lot of times they're still high schoolers, but I think that's what draws the audience to it, is that this is something missing in our everyday lives. And also the meaning of being the great warrior with the special skill that everybody disregarded, everybody overlooked. Because I think that there's a lot of people that can empathize with being overlooked, with having interests that are marginalized or that do not have a certain market value. There was this push for a long time of turn your hobby into a business. And thankfully, people have kind of woken up from that in recent years and are like, well, no, if I turn my hobby into a business, it's no longer my hobby. It becomes my job, and then I start hating my hobby. So there's what you do to pay the bills, and there's what you do to nourish your soul. And those don't have to be the same thing. And that's not failure, that's life. Vast majority of us are doing that. Now, some people are not dealing with this as well as others. Because there's guilt, there's shame, there is this concept of I should have done something else, I should be further along in my life, I should have these things that these other people online and on TV have. But it doesn't usually work out that way. And that's the part nobody really wants to talk about. Of all these success gurus are like, follow your dreams, manifest your vision. That works for about 0.5% of the population. And I'm not saying don't go after the things you want. Don't try to be consistent and disciplined in the field that you have chosen to be in. What I'm saying is that if you don't become a rock star, don't keep hammering on yourself for that. And I think we've, the dream of work hard, be successful, become this multimillionaire, it's still sold online all the time, and it's not realistic. It can happen. I'm not going to say it doesn't. What I'm going to say is that you're not a failure if it doesn't. There is so much more to life than we let ourselves see. Sometimes just putting down the phone, turning off the TV, and just walking outside. I've heard the term touch grass used more and more lately, and there's something to that. Just watch wind blow through the trees, watch the sunshine for a while, take a deep breath, listen to birds sing. It doesn't have to be this monotonous grind over and over again. I mean, work is, but that doesn't have to be our whole life. And our whole life doesn't have to be wanting more. There's been this minimalism movement of late. Tiny homes, smaller places to live, moving further away from the city if that's something that's viable for you. But it all comes back to this idea of getting away from the things that are slowly killing us. But at the same time, finding a group that you can have adventures with, having a tribe or a community that you connect with can also do that. That is part of the story of Isekai that gets lost a lot. It is not just about going away and being super powered, mage warrior in the other world and just dominating everything. That would be great, but we can't all do that because then we wouldn't all be dominating. We can all try to find a slice of life that we can take contentment in. And I would like to see, so there's the other one, and this isn't an isekai, this is Delicious in Dungeon, where this guy just wants to travel around in dungeons and try all the different monsters and recipes. And it's a little kooky at first, but the idea of just traveling around with people with that as the goal. It's not about defeating the evil wizard or the dragon or the dark lord. It's cooking. There's other anime and what's the term that's come out recently? Cozy fiction, where it's about having a farmstead and maybe having some disagreements with their neighbors and learning how to live together, or figuring out how to survive in this new world, but just to create a life, not necessarily to go on these epic quests, but to enjoy the day to day. And I think that a certain amount of escapism can be healthy as long as it doesn't start hurting you inside. And I say this because I see it over and over again in people, in the things they say, in the things they post, in the looks in their eyes, that just hurt because something is missing. And I think that something is a personal sense of fulfillment. And I try not to turn this into a complete TED Talk, but I think that there is a lot to be said of finding the small things. Miyazaki does this a lot in his movies, and there's this concept of ma, which I can come back to. But Miyazaki, if you notice in the Miyazaki films, there's a lot of, or Studio Ghibli films, where they just pause and they just eat. Or the two characters sit and wind blows through the grass. And Ma is this concept of pausing before the big action. And it is a moment to reflect. It is a pause before the next big moment of action, but it is also there to remind us of what the characters are striving for in the first place, why there's a conflict, what they are fighting for. And maybe we could do a little bit more of that in our day-to-day lives. Maybe a little more ma in our lives would do us good, of just pausing and remembering what it is we're living for in the first place, because it's really easy for that to get lost in the shuffle, particularly in the hypermedia age that we live in right now in 2026. I have to remind myself what year it is anymore. So yeah, isekai, escapism, fun escapism, and video games and board games and RPGs, and there's all sorts of fun little escapes. I think finding other people to share your adventures with. If it's cooking, if it's collecting recipes, if it's trying out cocktails or different types of tea, it might be getting a band together that never becomes famous, but you just have fun making songs. And it doesn't have to be the multi-million-dollar idea. It can be the friends we made along the way and enjoying that journey. This went a little all over the place. I do thank you for tuning in this week, and we'll tackle a new concept here soon. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.